Anarchism and the Black Revolution, Chapter 2, Part 2, written by Lorenzo Kom'boa Ervin, read by Naomi Kirst-Schultz. We should establish community councils to make policy decisions and administer the affairs of the Black community. These councils would be democratic neighborhood assemblies composed of representatives elected by Black workers in various community institutions, factories, hospitals, schools, as well as delegates elected on a block basis. We must reject Black mayors and other politicians or government bureaucrats as a substitute for community power. We must therefore have community control of all the institutions of the Black community, instead of just letting the state decide what is good for us. Not just jobs and housing, but also full control over schools, hospital, welfare centers, libraries, etc. They must be turned over to that community because only the residents of a community have a true understanding of its needs and desires. Here is an example of how it would work. We would elect a community council to supervise all schools in the Black community. We would encourage parents, students, teachers, and the community at large to work cooperatively in every phase of school administration, rather than have an authority figure like a principal and his or her uncaring, bureaucratic administration run things, as are done for present. The whole Black community will have to engage in a militant struggle to take over the public schools and turn them into centers of Black culture and learning. We cannot continue to depend on the racist or Black puppet school boards to do this for us. The local council would then be federated or joined together on a local level to create a citywide group of councils who would run affairs in that community. The councils and other neighborhoods collectives organized for a variety of reasons would make a mass commune. And this commune would in turn be federated at the regional and national levels, the aim being to create a national federation of Black communes, which would meet periodically in one or a number of mass assembly meetings. This federation would be composed of elected or appointed delegates representing their local commune or council. Such a national federation of communes would allow community councils from all over North America to work out common policies and speak with one voice on all matters affecting their communities or regions. It would thus have far more power than any single community council could. However, to prevent this national federation from bureaucratic usurpation of power by political factions or opportunistic leaders, elections should be held regularly and delegates would be subject to recall at any time for misconduct, so that they remain under the control of the local communities that they represent. The Black community councils are really a type of grassroots movement made up of all the social formations of our people. The block and neighborhood committees, labor, student and youth groups, even the church to a limited degree, social activist groups and others to unite the various protest actions around a common program of struggle for this period. The campaigns for this period must utilize the tactics of direct mass action, as it is very important that the people themselves must realize a sense of their organized power. These grassroots associations will provide to the usually mass, spontaneous actions a form of organization whose social base is of the Black working class instead of the usual Black middle class misleadership. The anarchists recognize these community councils as being a form of direct democracy, instead of the type of phony American quote-unquote democracy, which is really nothing but control by politicians and businessmen. The councils are especially important because they provide embryonic self-rule and the beginnings of an alternative to the capitalist economic system and its government. It is a way to undermine the government and make it an irrelevant dinosaur, because its services are no longer needed. The commune is also a Black revolutionary counterculture. It is the embryo of the new black revolutionary society in the body of the old, sick, dying one. It's the new lifestyle in microcosm which contains the new black social values and the new communal organizations and institutions, which will become the socio-political infrastructure of the free society. Our objective is to teach new black social values of unity and struggle against the negative effects of white capitalist society and culture. To do that, we must build the commune into a black consciousness movement, to build race pride and respect, race and social awareness, and to struggle against the capitalist slave masters. This black communalism would be both a repository of black culture and ideology. We need to change both our lives and our lifestyles in order to deal with the many interpersonal contradictions that exist in our community. We could examine the black family, black male-female relationships, the mental health of the black community, relations between the community and the white establishment, and among black people themselves. We would hold black consciousness-raising sessions in schools, community centers, prisons, and in black communities all over North America, which would teach black history and culture. New liberating social ideas and values to children and adults, as well as counseling and therapy techniques to resolve family and marital problems, all the while giving a black revolutionary perspective to the issues of the day. Our people must be made to see that the self-hatred, disunity, distrust, internecine violence, and oppressive social conditions among black people are the result of the legacy of African slavery and the present-day effects of capitalism. Finally, the main objective of black revolutionary culture is to agitate and organize black people to struggle for their freedom. As Steve Biko, the murdered South African revolutionary, has been quoted as saying, "The call for black consciousness is the most positive call to come from any group in the black world for a long time. It is more than just a reactionary rejection of whites by blacks. At the heart of this kind of thinking is the realization by blacks that the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. Once the latter has been so effectively manipulated and controlled by the oppressor as to make the oppressed believe that he is a liability to the white man, then there is nothing the oppressed can do that will really scare the powerful masters. The philosophy of black consciousness therefore expresses group pride and the determination by blacks to rise up and attain the envisaged self." Unquote. By the envisaged self, Biko refers to the black self, a liberated psyche. It is that which we want to rescue with such a black consciousness movement here in America. We need to counter black self-hatred and the frivolous, quote, party mentality, unquote. We also want to end the social degradation of our community and rid it of drug addiction, prostitution, black-on-black crime, and other social evils that destroys the moral fiber of the black community. Drugs and prostitution are mainly controlled by organized crime and protected by the police, who accept bribes and gifts from gangsters. These negative social values, the so-called dog-eat-dog philosophy of the capitalist system, teaches people to be individualists of the worst sort, willing to commit any kind of crime against each other and to take advantage of the other. This oppressive culture is what we are fighting. As long as it exists, it will be hard to unify the people around a revolutionary political program. Building a black survival program. But there must also be some way to ensure their economic survival, in addition to providing new cultural role models. It is then when the commune, a network of community organizations and institutions, assumes its greatest importance. We will build a socio-political infrastructure to intervene in every area of black life. Food and housing cooperatives, black liberation schools, people's banks and community mutual aid funds, medical clinics and hospitals, rodent control and pest extermination programs, cooperative factories, community cultural and entertainment centers, the establishment of an intercommunal electronic communications network, land and building reclamation projects, public works brigades to rebuild the cities, youth projects, drug clinics, and many other such programs. All these programs satisfy the deep needs of the Black community, but they are not solutions to our problems. Because although we can build a survival economy now, we have to realize it will take a social revolution to overthrow capitalism and obtain full economic self-sufficiency. But they will help us to organize the Black community around a true analysis and understanding of their situation. This is why they are called survival programs, meaning surviving under this system pending a social revolution. Building consciousness and revolutionary culture means taking on realistic, day-to-day issues like hunger, the need for clothing and housing, joblessness, transportation, and other issues. It means that the commune must be in the vacuum where people are not being properly fed or clothed, or provided with adequate medical treatment, or are otherwise being deprived of basic needs. Contrary to the rhetoric of some leftist groups, this will not make people passive or just dependent on us. Rather than struggling against the government and demanding those things, it inspires confidence. It inspires confidence in the revolutionary forces and exposes the government as uncaring and incompetent. That is more of an incentive for the people to revolt and overthrow the government than balding political pep rallies, than giving speeches, running for public office, and publishing manifestos and resolutions or party newspapers and other garbage that no one reads but their own members, like many Black and radical groups do now. We need a new way of confronting our oppressed situation. We need to unite our people to fight and to do what we need to educate, agitate, and organize. That's the only way we will win a new world. What follows is an example of the survival program, First, we must have community control of all businesses and financial institutions located in our communities, and for those businesses not working in our best interests or not returning some of its revenue back to the community, we will seize said businesses and turn them into community cooperatives and mutual aid banking societies. Second, we must have community control of all housing and major input in all community planning of Black communities. If a piece of property or house is owned by a slumlord, either private realtor or government agency, we will seize it and turn it into community housing cooperatives. We oppose urban renewal, spatial decomposition, yuppie gentrification, and other such racist schemes to drive us out of the cities. We must have complete control of all planning boards affecting and concerning the Black community. To enforce these demands, we should lead rent strikes, demonstrations, armed actions, and urban squatting to drive landlords out and take over the property. Third, we must have an independent, self-sustaining economy to guarantee full employment for all of our people. We demand that the U.S. government provide massive economic aid to rebuild the cities. The government spends billions per year for the Pentagon killing machine. At least that amount should be redirected to meet the needs of America's oppressed communities. Ghetto housing must be rebuilt and turned over to the occupants. Adequate jobs and services must be provided to all community residents, including first preference for all construction jobs in the Black community. When public works brigades are assigned to rebuild the cities, we must fight for Black grassroots control of all government funds allocated to the Black community through a network of mutual aid banking societies, community development corporations, and community development credit unions. Fourth, reparations, the big payback. The United States government and the rich class of this country has stolen and oppressed Africans in this continent for decades. They worked our ancestors as slaves, and after slavery, they continued to oppress, murder, and exploit our people on down to the present day. We must build a mass movement in our communities to compel the government and the rich to provide the means for our community redevelopment. They owe us for centuries of abuse and robbery. We must demand that reparations in the form of community development money and other funds be provided and placed in credit unions, cooperatives, and other mutual aid institutions in the Black community, so that we can start to obtain some measure of economic self-sufficiency. Yet we know that they won't give the money to us. We must fight them for it, just like we must struggle to overturn the system of wage slavery today. Fifth, end police brutality. We must organize self-defense units to protect the Black community and its organizations, and remove the state's police forces. We demand criminal prosecution and jailing of all brutal and killer cops. No jurisdiction for the state's judicial system in Black liberated zones. Sixth, we must undertake a large-scale program to train Black people as doctors, nurses, and medical paraprofessionals in order to make free, quality medical and dental care available to Black people. We must demand that the government subsidize all such medical and dental training, as well as for the operation of clinics, but Black people themselves must establish and run the free medical clinics in all Black communities, whether urban or rural. This would include community anti-drug programs and drug rehabilitation clinics. Seventh, we must establish a Black community-controlled food system for self-sufficiency and as a way of fighting to end hunger and malnutrition, including a trucking network, warehouses and communal farms, farmers' cooperatives, food cooperatives, agricultural unions, and other collective associations. This will include a protest campaign challenging the theft of Black farmland by agribusiness corporations and rich white, quote-unquote, land barons, and reclaiming it for our projects. This is especially important now that the U.S. has entered an economic crisis that will not be able to provide for our needs. We must force the government to provide the money for many of these projects, to be administered under our total control instead of by a government agency. Eighth, the Black community must have control of its entire educational system, from the nursery school to college. We must establish a Black liberation educational system which meets the training needs of Black children, prepares them for job training and future economic security, prepares them to be of service to their community, and gives them a knowledge of themselves and an understanding of the true history and culture of African people, as well as a program of adult education for community people whose earlier educational opportunities have been stunted. We should demand free higher education for Blacks and other minorities at full government expense, including remedial training programs for all who wish to qualify. Ninth, we must demand and fight for the release of all Black political prisoners and victims of racial injustice. We must investigate and review the cases of all such prisoners who are the victims of government political repression and racist frame-ups, and lead a mass campaign for their release. Some of our best revolutionary organizers are rotting away in the prison houses of this land. 10th, the central demand is for Black control of the Black community, its politics, and its economy. We have to take over the cities, establish municipal communes, and exercise self-government as a vital step. We are the majority in many of the major cities of this country, and we should be able to control our own affairs, or at the very least obtain some autonomy. But as we should now be aware, we won't ever get this opportunity for social power by voting for some Black capitalist politician, or from passively depending for salvation on leaders of one sort or another. We have to do it ourselves if we are ever to get on the road to freedom. The need for a Black labor federation. The demand for Black labor has been the central economic factor in America. It was Black labor that built the foundations of this nation, beginning with slave labor in the Old South on plantations, and then with sharecropping and other farm labor after the Civil War. Successive migration to the north and working mills, mine, and factories during a 40-year period, and on down to the present day. Black labor is important to the functioning of the capitalist economic order. Almost from the beginning, black workers have organized their own labor unions and workers' associations to represent their interests. The National Colored Labor Union in 1869 and the National Colored Farmers Alliance, Populist, in the same year. The Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters in the 1940s, the League of Black Revolutionary Workers in the 1960s, the United Construction Workers Association and the Black and Puerto Rican Coalition of Construction Workers in the 1970s, and on down to the present day with such unions or associations as the Black Workers for Justice and the Coalition for Black Trade Unionists. Some of these were unions, some were just associations of black workers in existing unions. Note, in addition to black organized or led labor federations in the 1870s, there were 90,600 black workers in the Knights of Labor in the 1880s and at least 100,000 in the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW, in the 1900s. In fact, the trade unions would not even exist today if it were not for the assistance and support of the black worker. Trade unionism was born as an effective national movement amid the great convulsions of the Civil War and the fight to end slavery. Yet black workers were routinely excluded from unions like the American Federation of Labor. Only militant associations like the Knights, IWW, and the Anarchist-initiated International Working People's Association, IWPA, would accept their memberships at all. This continued for many years until the founding of the Congress of Industrial Organizations began its campaign of strikes, sit-downs, and other protest actions to organize the unskilled industrial workers. Black labor was pivotal in these battles, yet has never fully reaped the benefits. In fact, the labor bosses betrayed them when the CIO was beaten down in the 1950s. You would think that American labor movement would see it as criminal or racist to ignore these fellow workers today in that fashion, but even now there is no labor organization in the U.S. which gives full representation and equal treatment to black workers. The fact is that even with some black labor officials in office, black workers receive far fewer union benefits than white workers and are trapped in the most low-paid, tedious, and dangerous jobs, even though they made substantial economic gains during the 1960s. The majority of the black masses are in the working class. Because of the role they play in production, black industrial and clerical workers are potentially the most powerful sector of the black community in the struggle for black liberation. As the victims of inequality in the economy, black workers have already begun to organize for their interests and to protect their rights on the job, even if the union is conservative and won't fight the boss. They have formed union caucuses and even independent labor unions where necessary. Of course, the unity of black and white workers is indispensable to combat and overthrow capitalism. But where white workers are now privileged and black workers are penalized, black unity and struggle must precede and prepare the ground for any black-white unity on a broad scale. Black caucuses in the unions can fight against discrimination in hiring, firing, and upgrading, and for equality of treatment in the unions now, while white workers still have yet to widely support democratic rights for black and other oppressed nationalities. Black caucuses are important. Where they are part of organized labor, they should strive to democratize the unions, regenerate their fighting spirits, and eliminate white job trust practices. These black caucuses in the unions should demand, first, rank-and-file democratic control of the union. Second, equal rights and treatment for all unionists. Eliminate all racist practices in the labor movement. Third, affirmative action programs to redress past racist employment practices and end racial discrimination based on seniority and other ploys. Fourth, full employment for all blacks, women, and other non-white workers. Fifth, a 20 to 30-hour work week with no reduction in pay. Sixth, the right to strike, including wildcat strikes without union sanction. Seventh, speedier and fair grievance procedures. Eighth, an escalator clause in all union contracts to ensure automatic wage adjustments to keep up with the rising cost of living. Ninth, full payment of Social Security by employer and the government, full unemployment compensation at 100% of base pay. 10th, minimum wages at union scale. 11th, prevent runaway shops, phony bankruptcy, or quote-unquote strategic plant shutdowns by companies without notice to union or to gain advantage in contract negotiations. 12th, a public works program to rebuild the Black and other inner-city communities and to provide work for Black workers. And 13th, workers' self-management of industry by factory committees and workers' councils elected by the workers themselves. In addition to the union caucuses, Black working people need a National Black Workers Association, which would be both a revolutionary union movement to do workplace organizing, but also would be a mass social movement for community organizing. Such a movement would combine the organizing tactics to both the labor and Black liberation movements. It is not designed to drive Blacks out of those unions, where they are already organized, but would rather serve as a tool to multiply their numbers and strength, and turn their unions into militant, class struggle instruments. The League of Revolutionary Black Workers, which organized Black auto workers during the late 1900s, provides an example of the type of organization needed. The League, which grew out of its major affiliate, the Dodge Revolutionary Movement, DRUM, was undoubtedly the most militant Black labor movement in American history. It was a Black labor federation which existed as an organized alternative to the United Auto Workers and was the inevitable step of taking the Black liberation struggle to the industrial shop floor, the point of production and capitalism's most vulnerable area. The League had wisely decided to organize in the Detroit automobile production industry. This was an industry where its workers were an important part of the workforce, and also in the Detroit Black community, where the League united the struggle in the factories with that of the Black struggle as a whole. It quickly became a major force in the workplace and in the streets, as many of its cadres organized on college campuses and in the Black inner-city areas. It had the potential to become a mass, nationwide Black working-class movement, but this potential was stifled through political faction fights among the leadership, lack of a solid organized base in the factories, company, UAW, and state repression, organized racism, and a lack of cooperation among white workers, among other such reasons. Eventually, the League split into mutually hostile factions and died after less than 5 years of existence. Even though the League was at best a revolutionary syndicalism organization and later a rigid Marxist-Leninist organization, and their adoption of this later authoritarian ideology with its ideas of purges and unquestioned leadership directly led to its demise. There is much that anarchists and radical Black labor activists can learn from the League. The main thing is that Black workers can and should be organized into some sort of independent labor association, in addition to or even in lieu of their membership in organized labor unions, and especially where the unions are of the sellout type and discriminate against Blacks. Also, it is much easier for Black workers to organize other Black workers and their community in support of strikes and workplace organizing. That is precisely why we need to establish a group like the League today, but as an anarcho-syndicalist organization so as to avoid the past pitfalls and ideological squabbles of Marxism-Leninism. simply stated what would be the program of a newly formed National Federation of Black Workers. First, for class struggle against the bosses. Second, to organize the unorganized black workers ignored by the trade unions. And third, for workers' solidarity among all nationalities of workers. It should be an international Black Labor Federation. From Detroit, Michigan to Durban, South Africa, from the Caribbean to Australia, from Brazil to England, black workers are universally oppressed and exploited. The black working class needs its own World Labor Organization. There is no racial group more borne down by social restraint than black workers. They are oppressed as workers and as a people. Because of these dual forms of oppression and the fact that most trade unions exclude or do not struggle for black laborers' rights, we must organize for our own rights and liberation. Even though in many African and Caribbean countries there are quote-unquote black labor federations, they are reformist or government-controlled. There is a large working class in many of these countries, but they have no militant labor organizations to lead the struggle. The building of a black workers' movement for revolutionary industrial sabotage and a general strike, or to organize the workers for self-management of production, and so undermine and overthrow the government, is the number one priority. What would an international black labor federation stand for? Firstly, since many black workers, farmers, and peasants are not organized at all in most countries, such an organization would be one big union of black workers representing every conceivable skill and vocation. Also, such an organization means the worldwide unity of black workers, and then secondly, it means coordinated international labor revolts. Capital and labor have nothing in common. The real strength of workers against capital and the imperialist countries is economic warfare. A revolutionary general strike and boycott of the multinational corporations and their goods by black workers all over the globe is how they can be hurt. For instance, if we want to make Britain and the USA withdraw financial and military support from South Africa, then we use the weight and power of black labor in those countries to wage strikes, to sabotage, to boycott, and other forms of political and economic struggle against those countries and the multinational corporations involved. It would be a power to be reckoned with. For instance, coordinated actions by trade unions and political action groups in that country have already caused major policy changes. A full-fledged general strike would likely lead to the total economic collapse of the racist South African state, especially if such strikes were supported by black workers in North America. In addition to asking the black workers to form their own international labor federation and to organize rank-and-file committees within their existing trade unions to push them into a class struggle direction, we also invite black workers to join anarcho-syndicalist labor organizations like the IWW and the Workers' Solidarity Alliance, the American section of the International Workers Association, which is based in Paris, France. But of course, it is not intended to drive black workers out of those unions where they are already active, but would rather serve as a tool to multiply their number and strength in such unions and make them more militant. This has been Anarchism and the Black Revolution, Chapter 2, Part 2, written by Lorenzo Kom'boa Ervin, read by Naomi Kirst-Schultz.